Okay, John, sorry about that. I accidentally stopped the recording. So this will be part two of your prize radio that you won from the Romeo Golf contest. So I'm just going to show you the power output now on the radio. So again, this is sideband. That's what I was talking about before with the SWR on the screen. I like that a little bit better than the other way. So this is the power output on my meter on sideband with it all the way up. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. It looks nice and clean on the spectrum analyzer. This is lower side. This is upper side here. It'll switch sides. So now it's on upper side. You can see a sharp drop off on the lower sideband, which is what it should do. And then here's AM, and I'll see the carrier in the middle. And when I speak on AM, you can see a little bit more power on this radio on AM. But generally speaking, if you look on the left, which is our start frequency, 27195, and on the right, 27215 is our stop frequency. That's the far left and right of the screen. And the middle is 27205, 20 kilohertz span. You can see even at our most extreme, we're pretty much under the 0 dBm line the whole way. And our on our center frequency is sitting around 40 or so dBm, so that's good. So we're way down going into the adjacent channels, which is what you want. If you lower the RF power down all the way on AM, it's just under a watt, and then you can see on my RF power meter there, you do get a pretty good amount of swing out of the radio. It's not real consistent, but it does give you that kind of heavy swing that people like to see from radio. So sideband, if we turn it all the way down, it's going to do a lot less. So it's fully controllable. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, about 4 watts. 12 o'clock. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. All the way up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So the RF power works good on this. It's really easy to use. It's got a front echo. It's got a Roger beep. I'll play that. That's the Roger beep. To hear that Roger beep, if you want to use it, that is. Obviously, to turn it on, it's just here. It does have a beep every time you change. It'll beep. I don't necessarily like that, so to shut that off, it's the lower portion here. So anything on the lower portion of any of these buttons, you hit function first. Like we can turn the whole screen off. There, the whole LCD screen's off. Now it's back on. Function. Now that beep is off. But now you won't hear your Roger beep if you wanted to hear it. Let's just say to do that. Now you'll hear it. So that's that. That beep is customizable in the software, but you only get one beep on this radio, unlike some of the other ones where you can have like a combination of many, like 6 or something. This one only has one, so I like that one. I think it sounds pretty good. You can also shut off the SRF meter. I don't know why you'd want to do that, but you can if you don't want it. High cut is here. You can scan. The upper buttons are just a single press. Same thing. Noise blank, stuff like that. Lower buttons function first, so it's pretty easy radio to use. Remember in the first video I was going to mention something about linear amplifiers, so I'll just try to touch that topic really quick here. If you're using a CB style linear amplifier, and what I mean by that is something that's not an amateur amplifier that has the full-on band pass filters for all the bands, and very costly. Amateur radio amplifiers are very costly, but you really get your money's worth for those. If you're using a CB style amp, you're not going to have band pass filters or anything like that, so sometimes people can have problems running these radios, quad 5N2s, whatever else have you out there on the market. I see it a lot with every time I try to use my radio, and it happens more times than none on sideband, I get a high SWR warning with the amp on. And that's not the radio's fault, that's actually the amp's design. There's not any filtering there to help take away, you know, the problem is there's a lot of spurious emissions and things that are passing out of those amplifiers that there's no way to filter it because there's no filtering whatsoever incorporated into the design So what happens is a lot of that stuff comes back and confuses the radio's SWR circuit because it's initially way in some other frequency, and the radio doesn't know how to handle that, and it just triggers that SWR alert, and that's what's happening more times than none. Your older radios, and that'll be the argument against it. Well, my other radios don't do it, and that's just the designs are different in a lot of older radios, and some radios still might have an SWR protection, some most likely don't, especially the ones that don't. You'll never know what's going on because you just don't know, because the radio doesn't present a problem to you. So a lot of times too, it's the way the amplifier, they call it hot switching, where you're switching the amp on with RF. And most would know on a real HF amp, we don't switch amps on with RF. We have a keying circuit. There's a key line usually out of the back of your HF transceiver, and there's a key line on the input of the amp. So you have a key line, you have like a jack coming out going into the HF amp. When you press your PTT on the mic, it sends a little voltage out and tells the amplifier to key up. You're not making it key with RF, you're making it key with the small amount of voltage, which in turn tells the amp, okay, it's time to switch on, and then it's already on, and then when you present the RF, the modulation into the amp, and the amp amplifies. So in the CB world, most of the amps are made with a delay, and it takes a little bit of RF to trigger that delay, but from the point where you first press the mic and you first start to talk, there's like usually a ripple effect, and sometimes that ripple effect can come back at the radio also and confuse the radio, because at a certain point it's a very fast motion, but sometimes it can present like an infinite SWR to the radio also, which in turn causes that problem. So there's various things that can happen that older radios will never be affected by it because they just don't know the difference, where these modern radios can be affected a little bit more by that stuff. And you'll see it sometimes happen. Some amplifiers do it worse than others. It's just common these days for, nobody's going to incorporate really that into an amp design with the key line, and then the radios don't have it either, so then we're kind of screwed on that side of it too. The only thing they could do is put the key line in the amp, and then you could put like a foot switch or a hand switch on the amp. That way you could key the amp, and the amp's already keyed, and then as soon as you present your RF, your modulation into the amp, it's already keyed, it's already going to start producing power. There's not that momentary lapse where you need your voice to trigger the amp to kick on, and that's what happens in the most times. The only other thing I'll say about the CB world with CB amps, people that make amps for CB and stuff, I think they do a good job on the design and the components. If they're using good quality components, it's not a matter of that at all. I'm not knocking anybody for what they do. They know a lot more than I do, and they can design an amp where I really wouldn't be able to do that just sitting here coming up with a design. And nor would I really want to either. I'd rather just buy a professional like HF amp that's fully made for what I want it to do, but I understand that not everybody wants to invest that kind of money into something, and they want power, but they want to spend a lower amount of money, so there's a trade-off there. And one of the trade-offs that you'll get with spending less money is something like this, and I'm not going to cover a whole lot about this, but this bandpass filter, this is something that your CB style amps will never have, and if they do have it, then obviously it's going to cost a lot more money. There are some companies that can design a bandpass filter for 27 megahertz, let's just say. Probably it's going to be more like 26 to 28. It's going to have a little bit larger TX passband. And what the TX passband is on this particular filter, it's a high frequency filter, because we're looking at 2000 megahertz to 2600 megahertz here, which is up in your microwave bands or something. So this would be something for the upper bands, but it would still work. The same principle applies for any frequency. You could pretend that this is 20 megahertz, this is 23, and this is 26. And then if we look at it like that, if we're adding the decimal and just pretending that the decimals after the numbers here and so on and so forth, then we could potentially see that on this filter, let's say the center frequency is 23 megahertz, that we're somewhere around, let's say 2, 4, 6, 8. So this is be like 22.2, 22.4. So we could say that our cutoff is about 22.4, which represents here, maybe just a little bit before there. And then it starts to drop off, and the filter really kicks in at about 22 megahertz, where we're about 20 dB down. So this filter would be good for about, we could say 22 megahertz to about 24 megahertz, so about 2 megahertz of spacing on the filter. But technically speaking, you're going to get your most power out around 22.2 to, let's say, 23 point, I don't know, what is that, 23.8 megahertz. So that's going to be the TX passband, so about 22.2 to about 23.8, and that's going to allow the most power to come through the filter and not technically be filtered whatsoever. If you go outside of that, then you start losing power and attenuation from the filter, and that's how it should work. And the same thing could be said here. Let's say that this is 26 here, and this is 28. Then of course, 26 point whatever here is gonna, a little bit more power is going to come through, and then as you go lower, and then our whole 27 up here would be covered and full power would be out. That's what we'd like to see. Not that we, it's me, that's what I would like to see on these CB style amplifiers, is really incorporate like a real filter that blocks out any spurious or anything. It just goes away. You're attenuating it right out of the signal. Basically, it can still be there, but the filter will just make it so minimal that it doesn't matter. That's what really matters, and that's what counts to me. That's why I just will never use those kind of amplifiers in the future ever. I just have no interest in them anymore because they don't have filters. And I mean, of course, you could run them. You would just have to go online and try to research a filter for like 26 to 28 megahertz. They are out there. You just have to find them. And then, of course, you have to keep in mind that they usually have a power limitation. And if you over exceed them, then you'll just blow up the filter, and then it won't work anymore. And you'll have, like, if you blow the filter up, you won't have any receive. That's one thing you'll notice, because if the filter's blown, then probably it's not going to work. And that also works on the RX side too. It will help attenuate out unnecessary signals coming in, and that's something to also be aware of. That the filter works RX and TX, but it's mainly more for TX in this situation. That's what I'm talking about, is the TX of the amp. If they're not going to make it with a filter in there, which these are very expensive, especially in the high power scenario, which a lot of these amps that are being made are for high power situations, a lot of RF power coming out of them. So the more power you put out, the more expensive this filter would cost. And that's why, sometimes you could pay just as much for the filter as you would for the amp. And a lot of guys want power, but they don't really necessarily think that they want it to be filtered properly. So that's why they can omit the filter out of the amp, sell it for a good cost, where it's cost effective and it's power effective, but then there's no filter. It would just be pretty much like straight across, and obviously at a certain point, going straight across is definitely unnecessary, because then if you're going straight across, you're losing power where you want it. Let's say this is 26 and this is 28. You want the power to stay here, but if it's going straight across, then you're taking away from here and it's going here, that kind of thing. So it's important to me. I don't know if it's important to others in the hobby, but I really care about that stuff. And that's why I always say that, it's best to look at what you're getting. And if you don't have the equipment to test it, and the seller is not going to really show it, testing on some quality equipment, and believe me, the stuff that I have here I would consider to be quality, but there's way better stuff out there that you could test amplifiers and do some real rigorous testing that I wouldn't be able to do here. Number one, I don't have the dummy load to, let's say, put 2500 watts into, because I just don't have a need for that. But I have a 1000-watt bird dummy load sitting up there on the shelf. But so my limitation would be testing anything under a kilowatt, and I wouldn't want to put a kilowatt in that anyways, because I don't want to stress it to the max. But that's as far as it goes for me. I can test the small stuff. Not that I really have anything here to really worry about, because I've kind of like washed my hands of all that stuff. But anyways, I have found that without the filters, that's why these amps are so cost effective, because they're limiting the RF cleanliness of the signal coming out. So hopefully that makes sense. maybe next time you look at buying an amp, you might want to consider that, something like that, or at least maybe research getting one yourself and putting it on the output of the amp, because it will help you in a lot of different ways that you may not be aware of. Hope you enjoy the radio, and congratulations on winning a prize on the contest. 73.